This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and welcome to Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. Here we are, springtime 2025, and the start of season 12 of the podcast. We've got lots planned for this season, so I hope you hit that follow or subscribe button on your podcast player and sign up to receive emails at thefurbearers.com so you can get all the latest episodes as they're available. There's no better way to start a season than with a friend, and I was honored that John E. Marriott, award-winning wildlife photographer and founder of Exposed Wildlife Conservancy, chose to share this story with me. Anyone who follows John or EWC knows that a cougar he had tracked for many years was killed near Canmore, Alberta earlier this year. The killing led to 2 orphaned kits, a harrowing experience for John, and a clear mission: to share this story with the public and lead to change for wildlife in Alberta. To give us the story from the very beginning and what he wants to see happen next, John Marriott joins Defender Radio. I think the best place for us to start talking today is the cougar killing incident. You've been talking about it. You've been extraordinarily passionate about it, and your write-ups and conversations have been so raw and powerful. Can you walk us through a bit of what happened and how you first learned about this cougar?
Back in 2017, 2018, I finished up my Kootenai wolf project. And at that point, I'd been working 11 years on wolf projects, and it had taken over the entire focus of my wildlife photography. And shortly after that, I started thinking, what other predator, I did grizzly bear sort of earlier in my career. I did another bear book in 2021 with grizzly bear biologist Sarah L. Maligi. But I was looking for a project that would be super challenging. And I ended up reading this cougar book called The Cougar Conundrum by Dr. Mark Elbrock. And it kind of really switched things for me, thinking, I need to start advocating for these big cats, for the cougars, for the lynx, for the bobcat, but in particular for the cougar. And so I did a couple of things. I went down to Patagonia, checked out the ecotourism scene there, where one single ranch brings in $5 million a year in cougar viewing for photo trips that come down there. So just to put that in perspective, all the cougar hunting tags sold in all of Alberta, British Columbia, the Yukon, Saskatchewan, et cetera, put together, guide outfitter, resident, doesn't matter. They don't even come to $1 million, let alone 5 million. So anyway, so there's things like this that just started sticking in my head. And in 2020, I started doing a bunch of tracking around Banff and Canmore. And 2021 is when I really said, okay, I'm going to just put my absolute heart and soul into this. So this is snow tracking. So waiting for the snow and then going out and trying to follow cougar tracks. And I know that probably sounds crazy to probably more than half the listeners, but trying to follow cougar tracks and catch up to them. And part of this was based on a study that I had analyzed in great detail that took place in New Mexico, where a bunch of researchers purposefully went and interrupted cougars repeatedly, 300 times, to see what would happen. Did the cougars attack? Did they protect their cubs? Did they run away? Did they, whatever? And out of 300 encounters, not a single attack happened.
Wow.
In fact, they hardly even had any aggressiveness. So this was sort of what I was basing it. I was like, I think I probably could. I'm going to have to be extremely fit. I'm going to have to, be willing to maybe have a whole winter where I don't see a single cougar. But to me, that was the challenge I was up for.
Yep.
So 2021, I had a couple of great encounters, including seeing, I was hiking up in this area called Rat's Nest Cave on Grotto Mountain, so about 6 kilometers from my house in Canmore, so not far at all from my house. I was hiking up this trail and veered off and found a deer kill from a cougar. And the next morning, I came out with my big lens, and I had picked out this spot where I thought I could stake it out from. And I staked it out, and sure enough, this cougar comes walking in. It's a beautiful female cougar. And I just wasn't in quite the right angle to be able to get a photograph. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to bother trying. But what I am going to do is I'm going to expose myself to this cougar. I just want to see what it does.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, does it run away? Does it look at me? Does it just sit down? Does it, run away and never come back? There was all these different ethical questions going through my mind, but thought, I'm going to just see what happens. And so I stood up and I moved out in the open slightly and I just stood there. Nothing happened. Cougar didn't see me. I was about 150 meters away. So I just waved one hand in the air slowly. Mm-hmm. And the cougar all of a sudden just flipped its head around and locked eyes on me.
Yeah.
Stared at me for 5 seconds and then bounded away in these 20-foot leaps.
Wow.
And I just went, whoa. Oh, that was amazing. But I had disturbed the cougar off of her kill. So I quickly raced down, set up a couple of trail cameras, and that was like half an hour and I was gone. Didn't come back for 5 days. 5 days later, I came back and one of my trail cameras had 1,440 cougar videos on it. And the other one had 860.
So you picked good spots for them.
So I picked good spots for them. And much more importantly, this cougar decided to come back. I briefly disturbed it. That's something I don't like to do. But in this instance, it was early on in figuring out cougar behavior. And I wanted to see what would happen. I do have a hard and fast rule when I track an animal. If I see it and it runs away, I give up immediately. Mm-hmm. So I never try and track that same animal again for that same purpose. So over the course of the 4 years since that, I have repeatedly tracked this female cougar, backtracked her, front tracked her, never tried to actually catch up to her per se. But I've just gotten to see what she did, what she killed. I found 19 different kills over 4 years, vast majority mule deer, which will be interesting later in the story here. So she became kind of this Canmore cougar. I tracked her right up to the edge of town, tracked her through the horse corrals that are just east of town, by the Alpine Club of Canada hut that's just east of town, up onto all these trails that people mountain bike, hike, wildlife view on, including myself or my regular mountain biking trails. It was just super cool to see what she did and how she was able to survive right beside Canmore, killing her deer, the odd bighorn sheep, the odd elk, the odd coyote, but she was basically invisible. Nobody ever saw her. I saw her the one time, but I started putting out trail cameras and I started getting her coming out. I got her obviously those first 2,000 videos, but then I had another couple kills where I put trail cameras on and I got her with kittens on them, which was super cool. And her vocalizing to the kittens and things like that. And then got ones of her walking through and sniffing. They have a scent marking spot, and her and the kittens would come through and all sniff around and scrape it a bit, and just like a house cat does.
Yep.
And it was just super cool to slowly get this glimpse into her life. And so anyways, this winter has been a weird winter. We have not had very much snow in Canmore. We had a brown Christmas for the first time in recorded history, the first I've ever heard of. We didn't have snow until end of January, which is just astonishing for a mountain town. Mm-hmm. Normally we'll have a couple of feet by this time of year. So anyways, finally started snowing a bit and I started going out and doing some tracking. Without the snow, it's impossible to go and track. And I had a sort of a quadrant of around my town that I would go and look for her in. This sort of big section that was sort of a big rectangle. And so I'd go out and I did a few tracking transacts and checked a few of my trail cams and wasn't getting anything of her yet. And then on February 10th this year, so just earlier in 2025, I decided to go out and check my trail cameras. It hadn't snowed for a couple of days, so my plan was just to hike in, check a couple trail cameras. When I do that, I always do just a quick 7-kilometer drive out to a place called Gap Lake, and I turn around and drive back. And the only reason I do that is because a couple times over the 4 years, I have discovered there's this big ridge goes all the way along the highway. And I've discovered that a couple times she chases deer down this ridge and kills them within sight of the road.
Oh.
So I've just, anytime I'm going out, I do this little 7-kilometer drive and back before I hike up my little trails to my trail cameras. just in case. I'm watching for ravens. I'm watching for anything unusual. And as I get out almost to the 7 kilometer mark, almost right at Gap Lake, I'm going up this little hill, and there's an eagle and a raven sitting on it. And it looks like something big and red in the kind of in the ditch up against this old fence. And so I quickly go and turn around, and I come driving back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like a dead bighorn sheep sitting there like 25 meters off the road. And I'm looking around at the snow trying to figure out, like, did this die on the road? And I get out and I look, there's no drag marks, there's no injury marks or accident marks. So I walk over to it, and right away, the first thing I notice is that it's a bighorn sheep ewe, a female, and it's got its head twisted at a really weird angle. That's a cougar kill. So then it's not, I mean, there are other signs, but one of the things they often do when they jump on from behind is break a neck.
Right.
Snap the neck back and get their jaws in underneath onto the jugular and choke or bleed out the ungulate. So they're designed to kill these cervids, these animals with hooves. So I started backtracking a little bit. I figured out where she had jumped on it. And then as I'm looking around, I'm also noticing lots of people tracks. And I didn't think too much of it, thinking, oh, well, it's right beside the road. Other people have probably come and checked it out like I'm doing. And then I notice a kitten track. And I'm like, oh my gosh, oh, look at that. And so I'm super cool. So I back away right away and think I'm going to go back in my vehicle. And I pull back about 150 meters, 125 meters. And I just sit in my vehicle on the side of this is a secondary highway. So it's paved, but it's 2-lane. I pull off onto the side of the road and just sit there with the big lens ready, thinking, maybe if I'm lucky, something's going to come out. This was only partly fed on. One of the other interesting things with a cougar kill is they shear all the hair off, almost like they've got a pair of scissors with them, which they do. They've got their teeth, and they shear all the hair off and open up the carcass and then dig in.
Interesting.
So they're very polite eaters.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting. They take all the hair off first and then eat. So that was another clear sign that this was a cougar kill. So anyways, backed up. I'm sitting there waiting. And all of a sudden I see movement off in the bushes, but it's not brown like a cougar would be. It's like I'm looking through, and all of it, I see people kind of going off through the bush. I can sort of make them out with dogs, and it looks like 2 or 3 people and a couple of dogs. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. I wonder, maybe it's the property owner. So this was right on the edge of a private property, okay, a rural property, one of the few that's out in this area. And so I thought, oh, maybe it's, people tobogganing or something, because I sort of thought I saw some sort of sled or toboggan or something. It's just a bit of a mind disconnect. I wasn't really sure what I was seeing. I did not think much of it. Just thought, oh, maybe it's the family of the property owners out tobogganing or something. So I thought, oh, wait till they come out. Now that they've been in there, the cougar's not going to be there, because they'd walked right in behind where the cougar had been, where the carcass had been. And so I thought, okay, as soon as they're gone, I'll drive up the driveway and go talk to the property owner and see if I can have permission to wander through the woods and see if I can figure out where this cougar has gone to, and her kittens. Or kitten. I thought at the time it was just one kitten. So I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and like an hour has gone by and still nobody has come out. I'm like, this is really weird. So I drive up the main highway, the secondary highway, and I can sort of get a glimpse into at the top of the driveway near the property owner's house. And I see 3 big trucks, like big, huge, full-on diesel type, big jacked up trucks, and 5 or 6 men milling about. And I don't recognize any of them. Like I knew who the property owners were, and I'm like, I don't know who. And I've met some of their family. I didn't recognize any of these people. I only got a really quick glimpse at them as I'm kind of driving by at 80 kilometers an hour. But I just thought something's off. Something's weird here. And so then I go and pull back down to the driveway, the start of the driveway, and I pull back about 150 meters, and I just sit there with binoculars waiting for these people to come out. It takes about another half hour, and they finally come driving down. And the first thing I notice when I get binoculars on them is that there's a cougar hound box in the back. So this is a big box in the back of the truck. Big, they can be wooden, they can be metal. basically they're like a sled dog box. So there's a hole for the dogs to stick their head out of, and a bunch of straw in the box. And otherwise it's fully enclosed, so they can't really see what's going on around them. And as this truck pulled out, I was watching with binoculars, saw two men in the front. The next truck came, two men in the front. Next truck came, two men in the front. And I'm like, what the? Like, I was disheartened is not nearly a strong enough word. I was crestfallen. I just could not believe what I had just seen. And my heart was thumping. And I'm like, oh my God, please tell me they didn't just go and kill a cougar. Now, they didn't even know which cougar this was at this point, but I thought immediately from the territory, from the kitten tracks, this could be my mom.
Yeah.
The cougar I've been following for 4 years. And so I went in, drove up the driveway, went up to the property owner's house. There was nobody there. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, have these people been hunting on this property like illegally? Have they, like, there's all sorts of things going through my head. I'm looking at the tracks. I can see there's been a sled of some sort pulled. So that was the toboggan that I had seen, some sort of hand pulled sled, like a fairly thick sled. I could see dog tracks everywhere. I could see all the people tracks everywhere. And intermingled with all of it, I could see cougar tracks. Now, at that point, I didn't get out, because as I was just looking at all these tracks sort of down out of the window of my vehicle, I see a vehicle coming up the driveway, and it's the property owner, one of the ones that I had. So I'd met the husband. I'd never met the wife before. And so I pull over, and she pulls over, and we start having a chat. I said, oh, it's really nice to meet you. And told her who I was, and I'd met her husband a few times before. And anyways, I said, did you let a bunch of cougar hunters go on your property today? And she said, oh, yeah, yes, I did. Do you know what happened? And I said, no, but sort of, we chit-chatted a bit, and I asked, why did you let the cougar hunters on your property? And she said, oh, well, they're with the Wild Sheep Foundation, and they said they were with this guy that I knew, and and it just sounded wishy-washy to me. And and she's an older woman living by herself in this property, and I thought, okay. Anyways, as we're talking, a conservation officer comes up, and he comes up and he asks who we each are. And then he says, are the hunters still around? And he said, I came back to check to see if they had done a legal hunt, because they had phoned me in the morning and told me they were coming out to potentially chase this cougar that had been seen. So someone had seen her along the road, and the CO actually said, I saw her eating the carcass briefly. It was looked like an adult female cat. Did not see any kittens, as I told him about the kitten tracks. And there was just some really interesting stuff in the conversation that I can't say publicly yet, but that really got my guard hairs up. And I really started thinking, what is going on here? And so by this point, it's getting dark. I go home. I'm thinking about this all night. I just can't stop thinking about this. The next morning, I was up at dawn, first light, out. I've convinced my wife to take my son to school, which I normally do. And I went out and I started tracking. And as soon as I left her driveway, which is 25 meters, so basically it goes highway, then there's 25 meters to this old fence where the carcass is as you slowly go uphill. Then you slowly go uphill another 25 meters and you intersect her driveway. And then it goes uphill for about another 150 meters of her property. And then it's crown land after that as you go up Grotto Mountain. And it gets steeper and steeper the further you go up. So I started tracking off of her driveway, saw the spots where the cougar tracks were crossing the driveway, where the dog tracks were crossing the driveway, where the human tracks had gone up with the sled. I could see two different spots where humans had gone up. It looked like a couple went up with dogs initially, and then a couple went up with sleds afterwards. And immediately I followed both sets of tracks and immediately noticed that there were kitten tracks everywhere from the day before. So not brand new fresh kitten tracks, but from the day before. I'm a very good tracker at this point. I know what I'm doing when I'm out there. I mean, I've been tracking wolves and cougars and so on for decades now. I've read every book on it. I've talked to experts. I would consider myself now an expert tracker on things like predators, ungulates, stuff like that. So right away, when I saw some of these kitten tracks, I could tell that they were from the previous day, while the kitten was with its mother still. I knew right away from looking at kitten tracks beside the human tracks that they were similar age tracks, that they're, if anything, the human tracks were newer. And so that the humans would have seen the kitten tracks. There were just so many kitten tracks strewn throughout the hillside that it was impossible that the hunters would not have known this was a female cat with kittens. And not only were they kittens, but they're little kittens. So to give you an idea, so they were, if I hold up my hand, so I'm a fairly big guy, I wear extra large gloves. The palm of my hand is about the size of what a female cougar track looks like. This kitten track was about twice the size of a house cat's track.
Oh, wow.
And so just a teeny little thing, just a couple of inches across. Whereas, for instance, an adult female track is 4 inches across, just under 4 inches across. So huge difference. Very, very obvious that there were very young kittens at this spot, because kitten feet actually grow faster than the kitten does. So by the time they're 1 year old, their feet are almost the same size as their mums are. So I knew right away, I just had this foreboding feeling as I'm going up, and I find this first spot where it looks like they've treed something. I thought that was the kill spot. Right away, I'm already dreading that I'm going to find the kill spot.
Yeah.
But I don't see anything. I search around, don't see anything. Continue following this sled track, up and up and up. I get onto Crown Land. I can see spots where the cougar is running full tilt, like big 15, 20-foot leaps. I lose the kitten tracks. Kitten tracks disappear altogether. Now it's just dog, human, and mother tracks. Getting up into some thicker timber, getting up into some almost cliff-like terrain. And I get to this big tree, and it's obvious something has gone on at this big tree. There's branches broken all over the place. There are debris strewn all over. The snow is all whacked down everywhere. Just obvious that they have treed her at this point. But I've searched around and searched around. I can't find any blood anywhere. I can't find any indication that this is where she's killed. So I continue to make my circle a little bit bigger. By this point, I'm 680 meters away from my vehicle on her driveway, on the private property driveway. And so I continue up a little bit further, and about 100 meters further on, sort of diagonally along the slope, I find another tree, and this time I find blood, and I find a spot where it looks like they posed her for photographs in the open, where there's blood. I can see like a body mark, kind of. I can see human tracks all around it. Then I search around some more. I find a spot where it looks like she's dragged her body. They've dragged her body down to the sled. And then I find the tree with splatters of blood coming down on the branches, and see where they have killed her. And so this is a bow hunting only zone. So, I can see a spot. I actually determined with Fish and Wildlife officers when I went in 2 days later and showed them the full scene. They collected DNA. I collected DNA to cover my own back. And we determined that they shot the mother cougar from about 8 meters away.
Wow.
So imagine the terror that must have gone through her, being chased 700 meters upslope away from her kittens into a tree, then being so scared for her life when surrounded by this big group of men and all these hounds, that leaping out, running another 120 meters, getting up another tree, and then having a human come up 8 meters away, dogs all over the place, probably humans all over the place, and just coming up, pulling an arrow and shooting her, and thinking that somehow that is an ethical hunt, something that should be done. So I spent about 45 minutes in that spot, and I had a whole range of emotions go through. There was some serious rage, frustration, a lot of real sorrow. I was by this point starting to really suspect that this was my cougar. this was her territory. I knew that she had had kittens dispersed late in the spring. I knew that she'd probably gotten pregnant fairly quickly or right even around that time. So would have had kittens around October. This would track perfectly. And then, as I'm looking at these tracks, as I'm examining around this kill site, I come upon the horror of seeing little kitten tracks come in and sniff around the area where her body had been. And just I was just almost apocalyptically mad at this point.
Yeah.
And I said a couple rageful things and posted them on Instagram. And, just the total lack of respect from these trophy hunters. And this is, to be clear, this is full on sport trophy hunting. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with managing wildlife. There's a ton of science out there that shows going out and killing mature males and females is horrible for population stability, increases human conflict with livestock and pets and humans. It just goes against everything that science actually tells us. And then to be killing females in particular, you talk to any cougar biologist worth their salt, and they'll say there's one reason you kill females, and that's to lower the population, to eradicate the population. And so then digging in a little further, I knew at this point there was already a bounty from the Wild Sheep Foundation of Alberta being offered on cougars anywhere where bighorn sheep were found, all throughout Alberta. So ranging from Grand Prairie, Grand Cache, Hinton, outside of Jasper, down to outside of Canmore, all through the Rocky Mountain foothills down to Waterton. Every single female cougar in one of those wildlife management areas was a $7,000 bounty. The money was coming from the Alberta Professional Outfitters Society, who our minister just happened to be a member of for 20 years, and his son still is. His wife is still a shareholder in his company. So he is supposedly supposed to have divested himself in trust of his company. So there's all these sort of loose threads that are starting to come together. There's all this terrible stuff. I get back down. By this point, the conservation officer has passed the file over to Fish and Wildlife. Because it involves private property and Crown land, they had to pass it to Fish and Wildlife. I start doing interviews with them. They come out on site. Like I said, 2 days later, we spent 4.5 hours combing over the entire site, taking DNA, showing them all the kitten tracks. The previous day, after I had discovered the kill site, I had gone and put out some camera traps, some trail cameras throughout the site, trying to see if I could capture the kitten on camera. And when I went and checked so this all happened on Monday, February 10th. Mm-hmm. Tuesday, February 11th is when I went up to the site and discovered all this, where she was killed. Tuesday night, February 11th, was when I put out the trail cameras. Monday afternoon, February 12th, is when I first went and checked trail cameras. And the very first trail cam I went and checked, the very first video was from Tuesday, February 11th in the evening, of 2 young cougar kittens crossing in front of the trail camera, heading back down towards, from where the female had been killed, back down towards where the carcass had been. By this point, highways had removed the carcass, so there was nothing for them to eat. They were just wandering around looking for their mom. I can't even imagine what must have been, the fear that must have been in there, wandering around at 4 months old. It's the equivalent of, say, a 3-year-old wandering around by itself in the woods. Yeah. 3-year-old human, they don't have no idea how to hunt yet. They probably hadn't even been on a hunt with their mother yet at that age. So in the video, it was really tough to tell if there were spots or not, because it was at night. In Alberta, it's illegal to hunt a cougar kitten or hunt a cougar accompanied by kitten with spots. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to prove that they had spots. I started peppering that landscape with trail cameras all over the place. When I went out with Fish and Wildlife, that 4.5 hours, we ended up setting up traps for them to try and capture them. They had seen my trail cam video at this point, and I'd sent it out to 5 different cougar biologists all over North America, including the godfather, Dr. Mark Elbrock in Washington State. All 5 had said 4 to 5 months old is my guess. No chance they can survive on their own. You're going to have to trap them or euthanize them.
Yeah.
Fish and Wildlife fortunately wanted to trap them, which I certainly wanted. I wanted no part of them getting euthanized or killed, as the better, euthanized, I think, is far too gentle of a word for what would have happened. So we set up traps, which was quite interesting. We set up trail cameras all around, including I got to put my own trail cameras out on the perimeter. The next day, so this is now Thursday, February 14th, went in late afternoon to check all the various trail cameras. The only ones I didn't check were the ones right at the trap. We knew the trap hadn't been activated yet because the Fish and Wildlife officer, had a trail camera, cell phone activated one right on the trap. So I avoided that area, just skirted all my other trail cameras and so on. Did capture a couple videos of the kittens, but everything at night. And then as I was checking one of my last trail cameras, I encountered fresh cougar kitten tracks in the snow. I started following them briefly and I said, no, I better not do that. That's going to scare the crap out of them if they see a human. So I went back 30, 40, 50 meters back to my trail camera again that I was just about to check, popped it open. There was nothing on it. And as I was looking at it, I just kind of glanced over to my left, went, oh my God, they're right there in the tree. So they had just been walking by the trail camera, kind of just to the side of it, had circled around. Those were the tracks I'd seen, but then had circled back. I had actually walked under the tree. I don't know if they were on the ground at the time or if they were already in the tree, but they'd gone up into the tree if they weren't already in there. And I'd walked right under them without seeing them, like 10 meters away from them, gone and checked my trail camera, seen the tracks, followed them briefly, come back to the trail camera, and then had just happened to glance over and see them. And so I had that quick little internal debate, do I go take pictures? Do I just leave them? I thought in the bigger picture, particularly in this instance, very valuable if I can get photographs here. Can I prove they have spots? And 2, I want to tell this story, and I want to tell this story, the full story, so people really, really can connect with this both emotionally and from a science base, from the facts, just none of this crap that's being made up on the side. So I then took 5 minutes, took out my big lens, always carry it with me on my backpack, went down, did a couple videos, got some shots. It was quite interesting, actually, because the kittens were just curious. They were just, peering through the tree at me and looking at me, no growls, no snarls, nothing, just curious. I was able to see immediately looking through even the camera. They're about 20 meters up in the tree, 15 meters up in the tree. And I was able to see spots on the undersides of them. And in fact, as soon as I got home, first of all, before I got home, I immediately phoned Fish and Wildlife officer and said, I've got him in a tree right now. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to keep them here? Do you want to come and try and tranquilize them? They thought about it and they thought, it's getting close to dark here because it was late afternoon. They said, we better not. There's more chance they go further up in the tree and then we got a real problem. And they could even die up in there or fall out and die. Yeah. So let's wait and hope they go in the trap tonight. And so we can think about getting them into a tree later on if we can't get them in the traps. So I said, good call. I agree with you. Not that I had any say in it. I agreed with them. Yeah. And said, okay, I'm gonna head home. I'll send you these photos right away. So I got home, sent the photos right away to them, and also sent them to Dr. Mark Elbrock again. And he responded within half an hour and said, oh, those have spots, 100%. Absolute confirmation. And so that immediately I passed that on to Fish and Wildlife and said, I believe we have an unlawful hunt situation here. These kittens do have spots, been confirmed by my photos. I sent him the photos. He disagreed slightly. He said, I'm not totally sure there's spots. I'm like, well, the cougar biologist says there are, and I can see them. Yeah. But anyways, that beside the fact, the next night, I got a message from the property owner saying, "Did you hear we've caught the kittens?" And I
Mm.
said, "No." Now I had asked the Fish and Wildlife officer, "Can I come when the kittens are caught?" And he said, "Legally, I cannot let you come. I can't let you be on scene. If a kitten were to get loose and something happened." And I said, "Yeah, totally understand. That's fine." But then the property owner was messaging me and saying, well, he can't stop you from coming out and sitting in my house because the traps were 75 meters away from her house. I had discovered that the kittens had been sleeping under one of her sheds, and that's where we'd set up the trap.
Okay.
So I phoned back the Fish and Wildlife officer and said, "Look, I don't want to cross lines with you, but she has invited me out. Are you okay if I go and stay in her house and photograph and video it from there?" And he said, "You know what? I can't stop you from doing that." "Sure." He said, "And I'll tell you what, once they're in the truck, I'll let you both come out and take a look so you can, say goodbye or get a couple photos or whatever." And I said, "That sounds like a very fair deal to me. Thank you."
Mm-hmm.
So I rushed out there. I was literally going to bed. I was like brushing my teeth in my boxers. And 2.5 minutes later, I was fully decked out in my winter gear, racing out the door and driving out there the 7 kilometers. Get out there. I quickly sneak into her house. I was very fortunate at that time. I was actually testing a new camera from Canon, Canon EOS R1, that is phenomenal in low light.
Oh.
And it came in super handy because I was basically photographing and videoing him capturing these kittens 175 meters away in the pitch black. And this camera was able to actually capture video and photos of it,
wow,
which was incredible.
That is incredible.
And so it was a little shout out to Canon there.
Yeah.
They sponsor me, but it truly was a difference maker in that night. And so people that want to go see some of those videos, go see some of those photos, they're all on my Instagram and my Facebook. Yep. And you can go back and read all my live updates as they were all going on. There's lots and lots of them there. Again, you start on February 10th and you can go forward from there. But anyways, they had actually captured both kittens. One Fish and Wildlife officer by himself was able to get them up into his truck. So that tells you how small and light they were. They're basically just slightly bigger than a Cocker Spaniel. So young kittens. Finally, when he got them up in there, we were able to go over and, we could tell through the whole process that this was pretty harrowing process for the kittens. They were screaming and growling, and you could see through, even from the house, through on the video and stuff, that they were quite fierce little creatures that thought they were fighting for their life.
Yeah.
And so when we finally got out there, they had calmed down a little bit in the back of the truck. But I could see, I got up and I put my phone up and was taking pictures. And the one little female in particular was she would turn and growl all of a sudden. And so we didn't stay long, a couple of minutes, got a few videos, got a few photographs. I kind of said bye to them, which it sounds a bit corny, but it's what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then walked away from it. And it was this mix of, it was sort of like when I saw them up in the tree, exhilarating experience, and yet just so full of sorrow. It was such a weird experience that it's actually quite hard to put into words. What it was just this strange combination that I've never really felt before. Of, there's an aspect to it that's thrilling, and like I'm 2 feet away from a cougar kitten in a cage in the back of a truck. And yet there's just this overwhelming sense of sorrow and tragedy about the whole thing. And I just couldn't let go of that. Like, it was right emotionally deep within me. And I remember that night sort of walking back to my truck and driving away from there. And by then the sorrow had set in, and thinking like, these 3 cougars are gone forever. And as soon as I saw the age of the kittens, for sure, when I saw them up in the tree on the Thursday night, and then the Friday night, seeing them in the traps, it's just, I was pretty much 100% certain at that point that it was my mama cougar. And I was heartbroken, thinking like, I'd actually looked this data up the year before, for my cougar management area by Canmore. It's called Cougar Management Area 6. And there hadn't been a female cougar killed in there in a decade. There'd hardly been any cougars killed in there. Wow. Year by year went by with no cougars killed there. And there's a couple of very good reasons for that. Number one, it's fairly close to habitation, and to residents, to businesses, to all sorts of stuff through there. There's a railway, a highway, a Bow River, like there's a lot of stuff in the way. And then the other really key factor is there's a lot of provincial parks.
Yep.
Now, you and your listeners may or may not remember this from reading through stuff that has gone down in Alberta recently, but back in December, the minister passed a ministerial order that all of a sudden, you can't have an off-leash dog in a provincial park. But if you're hunting cougars and you got a dog, you can have an off-leash dog hunting cougars in a park. And he made it for all provincial parks in Alberta. So all of a sudden, all these areas that weren't open to cougar hunting, because nobody goes out and tracks cougars like I do and spends a whole winter and finally sees one and then shoots it. I mean, I shoot it with the camera, but that's how, if a cougar hunter really had to be hunting cougars, that's how they should be doing it. Mm-hmm. That's a fair and ethical chase. But instead, they're doing this nonsense, chasing them with hounds. They sit in their trucks. They follow it on an iPad. They got GPS collars on the hounds. They've actually even got a way to recall the hounds without getting out of their vehicle, which is absolutely insane. So they can just send these hounds off, terrorizing a cougar, and then decide, oh, that's too steep of a cliff. I don't feel like hiking up that, and recall the hounds. So there's a lot of absolute nonsense. It's a ridiculous way of, I'm not even going to call it hunting. It's killing. But through all of this, there were things that just stood out to me. So as I went back home that Friday night, and I started getting more and more mad about these bounties, about these cougars being killed in the Bow Valley, and thinking, up till now, none of them been killed. And as this was all going on into the next week, and I was digging deeper and deeper, and media was all over this. We had CBC, CTV, Global, all these different newspapers and news outlets and social media outlets. And it was just going, a lot of this stuff was really going viral. When I added up all the different views on all my different videos, and most of my videos were literally just me talking to my phone, like the most boring videos you can imagine. And yet my views were going 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million. Like, it was just really getting out there and really resonating with people. And for very obvious reasons, this was something that people had no idea was going on in their backyard. And it just got people so upset, and they wanted to know what's happening with the kittens. Those kittens went and just sat in a Fish and Wildlife yard or building for a couple nights because nobody would take them initially. Yeah. Finally got into the Calgary Zoo. So there was all that going on. And the next week, I had some pretty astonishing stuff. I had informants start calling me from within Fish and Wildlife and Conservation Officer Service and saying, you need to FOIP, you need to do a Freedom of Information request on this. You need to check this person. You need to go look at these Instagram accounts. So I started doing all this stuff, and I started tying together some of this stuff with the Wild Sheep Foundation of Alberta, the Alberta Professionals Outfitters Society, Minister Lowen and his staff, some of these guide outfitters that were in on all of this. Mm-hmm. So in the end, I learned that there were 5 female cougars killed in our cougar management area, all with this $7,000 bounty on them. And so this is all stuff that's still very much up in the air. It's quieted down a little on social media, but I think there's going to be some really astounding stuff that comes out from these Freedom of Information requests, and from some of this digging. And there's also a few employees that are pretty close to being retired. And when they do, the shit is going to hit the fan when the truth comes out about a lot of this stuff. So there's a really clear cougar management plan in Alberta, and it is also really clear that it has not been followed. Yeah. And so this whole incident ties down to, this one female cougar, but it has now opened up this whole can of worms of all these other female cougars that have been killed by people that are trying to eradicate the cougar population so that they have more sheep to kill, more ungulates to kill. And I know a lot of society is not happy about that. The public does not believe that you should be killing predators just so that you can have more stuff to kill on the side. There's really been a public outcry about that kind of thing, about the bounties, about the decisions that Minister Lowen has made, completely ignoring his own biology department within Fish and Wildlife. He's got a couple of choice biologists that have followed along or that have been the green lighters, and then everybody else has been muzzled. So it's been quite an interesting last month and a bit to be a part of this Alberta scene. But there is some hope at the end here. I'm seeing things, I'm hearing things, I'm finding information bit by bit. There's been some pretty, I can't get too much into details yet, but there's been meetings with lawyers. There's been some real stuff that I think people should know that is going on in the background, and that there is actual progress being made. And that could take many forms. Success could take many forms, and it can be many steps. It could be one giant step.
Yeah.
And I'm holding out hope for a lot of different things right now. So otherwise I wouldn't be fighting, at this point. If I just thought this was a waste of our time and of people, of donors' money, everybody, the fur bearers, knows that I'm with Exposed Wildlife Conservancy. I'm now the chair of Exposed, and this incident, we have seen an absolute barrage of donations and support and messages and sharing and media interest. And that tells us that we're on the right track. Not just speaking up for apex predators, but in particular on this cougar incident, speaking up for cougar management in Alberta. And our next step is going to be British Columbia. Because as much as people might want to believe British Columbia is on a different track, they aren't really. They're on the same. They have a bit better control of their quotas right now, but Alberta actually had a better cougar management plan than BC. BC doesn't even have a cougar management plan. So there's a lot of stuff that can still be done here, and we're really staying on top of it. So I want people to know that despite the horrors of this story, and despite all the bad news that has come out of it, and then there's sort of these few silver linings with the kittens getting to Calgary Zoo, announcing yesterday that they have found their forever home. I can't say what it is yet. I'll wait for the forever home I know where they're going, but I think people are going to be, sort of, I don't know if thrilled is the right word, because how can you ever be thrilled about two kittens that don't get to grow up in the wild?
Yeah.
But they're going somewhere that's decent.
Okay.
So where their story is not going to ever die. I'm never going to let it die. And I guess I want to sort of finish this one man recording. I mean, you haven't had much to say so far, but
it's great. I get to just enjoy my coffee and listen. Yeah,
but there's one thing that I am not going to let go, and that is this feeling of, I've used this word sorrow. Mm-hmm. There's an emptiness now whenever I drive out of my house. I literally walk down my stairs to my driveway, and I look at the slopes that I used to track her on. And anytime I drive to Calgary, I pass through the area that she used to navigate through. And there's this emptiness now. And I know another cougar will come back in, but there's something about her being gone. And I'm going to share a very personal side of the story. That is the reason that I am never going to let this fight go. So as some of you know, and some of your listeners will know, that I went through a very personal cancer battle in September 2020 through all the way through to June 2023. And it was this female cougar that got me out of bed during chemo in the winter of 2023. It was my thought that I'm going to go check my trail cam and see if she's on there. I'm going to go up this and see if I can just find her tracks. And I would have gone through 4 days of chemo, and I could barely walk downstairs. And yet 2 days later, I was out on the trails looking for her, fully masked up because I couldn't breathe the cold air because it was hurting my throat, I had to be completely covered head to toe, other than my eyeballs sticking out, because the cold would affect my skin. And yet there I was out there because of her spirit. And so losing that spirit out of this wilderness, you can argue whether Canmore is even wilderness or not, but as long as we have cougars around and wolves around and grizzly bears around, I still think we're wilderness. And we coexist with it, even though we're doing our best at times with all these new developments to choke out the wildlife. But we are still right now an example of a community that can live with these big predators. And to me, that emptiness of not having her here anymore, she was the one who knew how to, I bet so many locals had her see them when they were on their mountain bike, when they were walking their dog, yet nobody ever saw her. Hardly anybody ever saw her. So I feel pretty fortunate that I got to see her once. And then I have confirmed with my trail cameras that it was indeed her. I have video of her leading all the way up to February 6th on my trail cameras that I have not released yet, but it was her, unfortunately. And so, yeah, that's the whole story, Michael.
Well, and it's it's impactful, it's emotional, it's intense, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. And it very much sounds like you're describing grief when you talk about the sorrow and that emptiness. And anyone who has lost someone meaningful to them out of their day-to-day life, I think, can connect with that feeling you're describing. I just have two real follow-ups at this point. And we're not going to get into all of the other things going on in Alberta related to wildlife, and there's a lot of them. One of them being the wolverine trapping regulations changing, which just everybody outside of that specific community is going, why? It doesn't make sense. It's a bad idea, but it sounds very much like the others. So if you had 5 minutes with the minister, what would you say?
What would I say? You know what? I'm not even sure it would be worth wasting 5 minutes of my day from everything that I've heard and seen of him. So I don't think he's a good individual. Unfortunately, that can happen in government. We can get narcissists in there. We see it south of the border, where you get people that all they care about is the toxic masculinity and supporting their own little group. And I think Minister Lowen is all about supporting guide outfitters and trappers, because that's what he grew up with. That's all he knows. He's not a particularly educated man. I have no problem saying these things because I've done my research and I know what I'm dealing with on the other side. I guess I would attempt to educate him a bit, but Minister Sarah Al-Maligi, who is a certified biologist, grizzly bear biologist, wildlife biologist, stands there in the legislature and asks some questions, and he makes fun of her and calls science an ideology and talks about, how dare she call out his family, and, just makes childish remarks. And so I've actually put out an open invitation for Minister Lowen to debate me in public. He can pick the time and place. I'll debate him in public. He unfortunately, as we would have suspected, ignored it.
Yep.
I thought maybe he'd think it was more fair ground, not having to go up against a biologist, because all I have is a degree in Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Management, that maybe he'd think he'd have a hope against me, but he wouldn't. Yeah, if I got 5 minutes with him, I mean, if it was public, I'd have lots to say. But if it was just me and him in a room, I'd probably end up just insulting him, which is not necessarily the best way to go about things. But at this point, I've really had enough, and you may be thinking, well, why is John calling out this guy publicly? And, we've had enough here in Alberta. Our wildlife, the Minister of Forestry and Parks, who's in charge of wildlife, is supposed to be a steward in charge of protecting wildlife. They're not supposed to be jetting off to 4 international trophy hunting conferences this winter, promoting trophy hunting, when not, he hasn't been to a single wildlife photography conference. He hasn't been to a single ecotourism conference. He hasn't been to anything outside of Canada other than these trophy hunting conferences. So, that really tells you where his heart lies, where his mind lies. And I got no time for that. He's supposed to be a steward of wildlife, protecting wildlife, standing up for wildlife, and he has done none of that. Removing limits on wolverines is just one of a dozen examples, clear-cut examples of him just not giving an SHIT. All he cares about is pleasing his buddies and his own family interests. He's in direct conflict of interest, and he should be resigning from his position.
On that note, what can people do? People within Alberta, people outside of Alberta. We've had folks contact us from Europe saying, I read about this thing involving a cougar. Are you doing, like, people want to see something happen. They want action to take. So what are the opportunities people have in front of them to deal with this, whether or not they're local?
Yeah, so there are a few things. So if you're local, the single most impactful things you can do right now is getting your own MLA involved, as well as involving the ethics commissioner. So it can be your own handwritten email at this point. It can be a phone call. Phone calls to Fish and Wildlife are very effective. I've heard from people inside that are informing me anonymously, unfortunately. I wish I knew who they were, but that this is causing a tremendous impact within Fish and Wildlife, that they've been just inundated with emails that they're having to answer, phone calls. So I also think people from outside of Alberta can take this a step further and go to the Minister of Tourism, Rebecca Schultz. She's jokingly called the Minister of Oil and Gas because she never says a thing about tourism or the environment. And instead, she's Minister of Environment. Minister of Tourism is, slipped off my mind right now, but you'll be able to inform listeners of that. But anyways, tell them what you've spent going to Alberta, why you go to Alberta. Why do people come to Banff National Park? It's got big, pretty mountains, but you can go to Switzerland if that's what you want to see. It's because you have the chance of seeing a bear, of seeing a wolf, of seeing Rocky Mountain elk, all these beautiful big species. And wildlife is what draws people to our wilderness. And in Canada, we're fortunate we've still got a lot of it, but it's pretty easy. We already see from the past how we as white people and settlers and so on almost wiped out a lot of species in North America from overhunting and overtrapping at the turn of the 19th century. So there's no reason that we couldn't be stupid enough to go back to that again. So I think to keep people hopeful, you can be contacting these ministries and things like this. If this is not your style, if you prefer, a petition or a letter you can sign on to, that is all coming down the pipe. Actually, pretty soon, there's some stuff coming down the pipe. But we've been working very, very carefully on that with a couple of other groups, developing a strategy that we think is going to be most impactful. So that's why you don't see a petition out right now or an easy to sign letter out right now, because we're crafting something very specific. I do think that donations help a ton right now. It's worth pointing out that as the chair of Exposed, I cannot take money. I've never taken money from my conservancy that I co-founded with Kim Odland. Never taken a cent. I've never even covered my own expenses from charitable money. So if you go make a donation, that it is going to be going to fighting this cougar management stuff. It's going to be going to things like overtrapping of wolverines. We've been fighting hard on that too. So lots of stuff that are tied to the fur bearers, but also stuff that's just tied specifically to Alberta, to what's going on here right now. So that's a great way to support. You can do just a small monthly donation or a one-time, whatever you feel like, whatever you're able to. And then the final thing that I would say is it really helps anytime you share social media stuff. It may not seem like much. You may go, I've only got 27 friends or whatever, but every single little bit helps that algorithm spread it further and further. Put it into your stories on Instagram. Go throw it on TikTok if you're on TikTok. Go Facebook is a big one for us. We've had huge interaction on this story from Facebook. Go and follow me. Go follow Exposed. Share whatever stuff that we post. It all helps in the long run. And I think that's, stay tuned for what's to come, because there are some big things to come, bigger than what's been out there already. I can only hint at it for now, but Yeah, without getting into too many details, just know that there is more stuff coming that you're going to be able to be involved in, and that you will be able to support us on simply by throwing your signature on or sending a form letter.
I want to thank John for his honesty, tenacity, and courage in sharing this story and continuing to advocate not only for the cougars killed in Canmore, but for all wildlife in Alberta and across Canada. You can learn more about Exposed Wildlife Conservancy and John's efforts by visiting exposedwildlifeconservancy.org or following them on social media. Links are available in this episode's show notes in your podcast player and at defenderradio.com. I need to thank you, too. This show is now in its 12th season, and that's only possible because of people like you who come back to listen more, share episodes with friends, and leave reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen. Thank you. I can be followed on Instagram at Howie Michael, Blue Sky at Defender Radio, and on Facebook on the Defender Radio podcast page. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bearers, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.